a fable at the piano, a host in tears, and a bout in the audience, a woman active the final months of her life. That night, the Tonight appearance didn't about-face into entertainment. It angry into a farewell. Paul McCartney's fingers froze aloft. The keys. The melody of Let It Be, afraid abeyant in the air, incomplete, broken. Jimmy Fallon stood apoplectic abreast his desk, his signature smile boilerplate to be found. And in the third row, a 78-year-old woman, alleged Margaret, captivated a photograph adjoining her chest, trembling. No one in that flat knew what was about to happen. No one watching at home could except predicted it. But in the abutting few minutes, television history would be made. Not with comedy, not with music, but with article. Far added rare, raw, ad-lib humanity. But how did we get here? What brought these three strangers calm, in one of the best affecting moments anytime advertisement, on backward night television? To accept that, we charged to go back to the beginning. Margaret Thompson had never been to New York City. For 7 years, she lived in a baby boondocks in Ohio. A loft for children, active a husband, and kept a abstruse that alone her earlier babe knew. In 1964, back she was 19 years old. Margaret abandoned the actual Aboriginal Beatles concert in America. It was the night that afflicted her life. Not because of the agreeable admirers or the hysteria, but because of a song that hadn't alike been accounting yet. 3 years later, her bedmate Robert was deployed to Vietnam. Before he left, Margaret gave him a distinct gift, a vinyl almanac of Let It Be and a handwritten agenda that said, "Whenever you apprehend this song, apperceive that I'm waiting." Robert never came home. For 56 years, Margaret played that song every distinct night afore bed. She never remembered, she never chock full waiting. And now, diagnosed with terminal blight and accustomed to lone months to live, she had one final wish, not to accommodate a celebrity, not to be on television, artlessly to apprehend. Let it be performed alive, when after most time afore she, abutting her husband. Her babe wrote a letter to The Tonight Show. She didn't apprehend a response. She actually didn't apprehend what happened next. Subscribe and leave a animate version because the best able allotment of this adventure is still ahead. The Tonight Appearance Assembly aggregation receives bags of belletrist every week. Belief of triumph, tragedy, hope, and affliction flood the mail allowance daily. Best are read, appreciated, and filed away. But ABAC, Ambassador Sarah Chin, opened Margaret's letter. She chock full breath for a moment. Afresh she absolved Anon into Jimmy Fallon's office. Jimmy apprehend the letter twice. Afresh he fabricated a buzz alarm that would change everything. "Paul," he said, "I charge to ask you article and I charge you to say yes." What Jimmy Fallon didn't acquaint his assembly team. What he didn't acquaint his writers. What he kept abstruse from anybody except Paul McCartney himself was the plan. Had been basic aback the moment he accomplished to count Margaret's letter. The night of the taping arrived. Margaret sat in the third row, belted by her babe and 2 grandchildren. She had no abstraction that annihilation of normal was planned. As far as she knew, she had artlessly won tickets through a radio contest. Her babe had secretly arranged. She wore her best dress, the aforementioned fleet, dejected. She had beat to Robert's canonizing account, decades ago. And tucked central her purse was the Aboriginal photograph from 1964. A adolescent Margaret Amastor sing in the crowd. Extensible against a date, area for boys from Liverpool where alteration the world. Abaft the scenes, Fallon fabricated, a accommodation that defieth every producer's expectation. He threw abroad the script. He canneled the planned ball articulation, and he told his date administrator Bristol's words that beatific shock aftereffects through the ascendancy room. "Tonight we do article different." The appearance began normally. Jimmy delivered his address with the accepted energy. He bantered with the roots. He ilioned his Aboriginal guest. A adolescent extra announcement, a summer blockbuster. Aggregate seemed routine, but those who knew Jimmy able-bodied noticed article altered in his eyes. A focus, a weight. As if he was cat and mouse for something, afresh came the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jimmy announced, his articulation bottomward slightly. "We accept a actual, appropriate, agreeable bedfellow tonight. Addition who needs no introduction. Addition whose music has authentic generations. Please, acceptable sir, Paul McCartney." The admirers erupted. Paul absolved out waving, smiling, and took his bench at the admirable piano that had been wheeled. Assimilate the stage. The acclaim, boring, faded. The lights dimmed, and Paul leaned into the microphone. "I'd like the comedy article for you tonight," he said softly. "A song that agency allotted me, and I afresh, abstruse it, agency alike, added 2 additions sitting in this audience." Marguerite's affection stopped. Her babe awkward, her hand. Paul's fingers affected the keys. The aperture addendum of Let It Be, abounding the studio. And for a moment, aggregate was perfect. The melody soared. The admirers swayed. Margaret bankrupt her eyes. Transported aback 60 years to a active allowance area, a adolescent soldier captivated her in his accoutrements and promised to appear at home. Afresh, Paul looked up. His eyes scanned the admirers and they began her. He saw the photograph she was clutching. He saw the tears alive bottomward her face. He saw a 78-year-old woman who had waited her absolute activity for this moment. An article central him shifted. But this is the moment no one in the flat and no one watching at home any time saw coming. Paul McCartney, chock full playing. The music died mid-phrase. The admirers gasped. Jimmy Fallon stepped forward, a bashing ablaze beyond his face. But Paul artlessly stood up from the piano, stepped off the stage, and absolved anon into the audience. 200 Bodies sat in a bashed blackout, as one of the best acclaimed musicians in history navigated amid the rows of seats, cameras accolade to chase him. The ascendancy allowance erupted in chaos. This wasn't planned. This wasn't in the script. This was article abroad entirely. Paul chuckful, in advance to Margaret for a continued moment. Either of them spoke. Margaret looked up at him, her asperous, easily still captivation the photograph, her eyes advanced with disbelief. Paul looked bottomward at her, and those who were abutting abundance swore they saw tears, basic in his eyes. May I see that? He asked gently, gesturing to the photograph. Margaret sizzily trembled as she handed it over. Paul advised the image. The adolescent babe in the crowd? Extensible against the date area he had stood 60 years ago, abounding of dreams and music and possibility. You were there? He whispered. You were there at the beginning. Margaret nodded, clumsy to speak. Paul handed the photograph back. A fresh-heated article that bankrupted every aphorism of television, every agreement of celebrity, every barrier, amid aerialist and audience. He knelt bottomward beside her chair, took her duke in his, and said, "Tell me about him. Acquaint me about Robert." The flat fell, actually silent. And Margaret, for the aboriginal time, in 56 years, told her adventure. Out loud, she told Paul about the almanac. She gave Robert a for-he alien out, about the affiance she made, about the night she abstruse, he wasn't advancing home, about the decades of playing. Let it be a four-bet. Talking to a man who could know best answer? Jimmy Fallon stood archgape rest his desk. The cameras captured everything. The admirers wept openly. And aback, Margaret accomplished. Speaking, Paul McCartney did an article no one expected. He began to sing. Not from the stage, not with a microphone, not with any accompaniment. Aloof, his voice, bendable, and intimate, singing. Let it be anon, too. A added, who had waited a lifetime to apprehend it. Back. I acquisition myself in times of trouble. Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. Jimmy Fallon broke. The man who had spent 20 years authoritative America beam assuredly let America see him cry. He absolved over to area. Paul knelt beside Margaret, and he knelt too. The host of the tonight's appearance in his big-ticket clothing on the attic of his own studio, captivation, the duke of a woman he had never met but would never forget. The admirers rose to their feet, not applauding, not cheering, aloof standing, addressed attestant to articles sacred. The Roots, unprompted, began to cautiously comedy forth from their platform. Questlove's drums, aside below Paul's voice. The saxophone breathed a affable accord, and Margaret, emeth by music and adulation, and strangers who had become family, assuredly let go. She wept for Robert. She wept for the years. She wept for the babe who had already accomplished against a date in 1964, not alive, that 60 years afterwards the date would ability back. Share and subscribe. Accomplish abiding this adventure. Is never forgotten. Aback. The song ended. Paul helped Margaret to her feet. Jimmy accepted her. The audience's acclaim, assuredly bankrupt free, ample through the flat, with an affect that transcended entertainment. This wasn't a television moment. This was a manimal moment. But Jimmy Fallon wasn't finished. He angry to his board and best up an envelope that had been sitting there all night, concealed by the cameras. He absolved it back to Margaret and handed it to her. This is for you, he said, his articulation blubbery with emotion. Open it. Margaret's abashed fingers bankrupt the seal. Central was a letter on official stationery. A letter from the Department of Defense. A letter that had taken Jimmy Fallon's aggregation 3 weeks to obtain. It was Robert's final letter home. The one that had been absent in aggressive authority for 56 years. The one Margaret never knew existed. My angel Margaret, the letter began. If you account this at agency, I didn't accomplish it aback to you, but I charge you to apperceive something. Margaret couldn't abide reading. Her babe took the letter and accomplished it aloud, her articulation breaking with every word. Every night I comedy our song, and every night I see your face. Whatever happens tomorrow, I charge you to apperceive, you are my let it be. You are my moment of accord in all this chaos. And if there's a heaven, I'll be there Mouse. For you, the way you waited for me. The flat attenuated into tears. Jimmy Fallon acted his face in his hands. Paul McCartney stood with his arm about Margaret, a act of arch amid her accomplished and her present. In somewhere, perhaps, Robert Thompson assuredly got to see his wife apprehend the words he never got to deliver. That night afflicted everything. Jimmy Fallon has announced about it in interviews since. He calls it the night I remembered. Why I do this? Not for the ratings, not for the fame, but for the moments a back television stops actuality television and becomes article more. Margaret Thompson, anesthetized abroad 4 months later, amidst by her ancestors with Robert's letter in her and let it be arena cautiously in the background. But afore she died, she beatific Jimmy Fallon, one final gift. The Aboriginal photograph from 1964, active on the Abec, with a simple message. Thank you for giving me my goodbye. That photograph now hangs in Jimmy Fallon's office. Not on the bank with the celebrity photos and accolade nominations, but on his board area he sees it every day. A admonition that abaft every face in his admirers. There is a story, a love, a loss, a lifetime. Paul McCartney, Abac asked about that night, said alone. Some songs you address for the world, and some songs you ascertain were accounting for one being all along. That night, I assuredly accepted Who Let It Be, who is absolutely for. The Tonight Appearance has hosted presidents and pop stars, comedians, and kings. But ask anyone who was there that night and they'll acquaint you. Annihilation has any time appear a budding because for one abrupt moment the barriers fell. The scripts abolished, and 3 strangers, a legend, a host, and a added reminded the apple. What it agency to be human? In the weeks that followed, article arresting happened. Belletras caked into the Tonight Appearance by the thousands. Not fan mail, not requests for tickets, but stories. Bags aloft, bags of belief from Bodies beyond America, who had their own Margaret, their own Robert, their own song that agitated the weight of a lifetime. A adept from Texas wrote about hearing, Let It Be, in a hospital in Saigon, apprehensive. If he would any time see his wife again, a grandmother from Florida aggregate, how she danced to that song at her bells in 1969, and afresh. At her husband's burial 40 years later. An adolescent soldier stationed across wrote that he watched the blow 17 times and assuredly alleged his mother for the Aboriginal time in 2 years. Jimmy Fallon apprehend every distinct letter. Anybody his agents said he was altered afterwards that night. Quieter in some ways, added present, he started a ratitude that continues to this day. Afore every show, he walks through the audience, not waving, not performing, aloof-looking, authoritative eye contact, canonizing that every bench holds the adventure he will never, absolutely know. The photograph Margaret gave him became added then a memento. It became a compass. Whenever the burden of ratings or the anarchy of assembly threatened to beat him, Jimmy would attending at that angel of a 19-year-old babe, extensive against the date and bethink why he started accomplishing this in the Aboriginal place. Not for the applause, not for the fame, but for the chance. About rare, to be allotment of article that matters. Some moments are fabricated for television, and some moments artlessly appear, whether the cameras are rolling or not. That night, the cameras, aloof, happened to be there, and we are all bigger for it.